Okay, I hit record. I'm with Liz Hurley. Liz, tell us a little bit just to help anybody listening get to know you. Tell us a little bit about where you are in your author journey.
Hello, Jeff. Good morning. I am. So, first of all, I'm just going to explain. I am not normally bright
Yeah,
red, but I have just got. I know
sorry.
I currently match your cap, um, but I've just got in from a run. So, by the end of this session, I may have calmed down a little bit, but I am a little bit whoop whoop.
That's, yeah, a run in a very cool place, which we don't need to talk about. That you did very well in. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So I come from Cornwall in England, which is the very southwest tip of Great Britain.
very cool.
That's where I am. Oh, and in my author journey, I write under several pen names, and I think I'm on my 10th or 11th fiction, and I've got 10 non-fictions out as well.
Nice. That's fantastic. So you sent me a piece, which is I'm going to bring up on the screen. Because it is like 5 in the morning for me and you just got back from a
Oh
run.
my
Let's make people look at the
God.
piece and not at us. So
5 a.m. Jeff, thank you.
oh
God,
yeah,
I'm
no,
sorry.
this is normal for me. I'm always editing and working at 5 a.m. Life of an editor with children and a full-time job.
Oh God,
Um
yeah.
so what did we want? First off, your piece is fantastic. So what did you want to work on today?
I've got this is the start of what I think is going to be a series, and
Okay.
I'm really feeling the love for this at the moment. You know, when you get into that really excited feeling at the beginning of a book in a
Yeah.
series, I'm adoring it. What I want to make sure is that I give myself longevity in the project and that I don't start getting annoyed with my characters because I've worked them into a corner
Okay.
in terms of their personality. So I don't want to end up in books 2 or 3 thinking I'm bored of this character or this character is no longer
Gotcha.
interesting to me the
Okay.
way that somebody else is interesting to me. So I need to make sure right from the beginning I get her right because she's going to be the engine all the way through the series. And I
Nice.
want to make sure that I've obviously I can't nail down, well, I know some authors can, but I can't nail down books and books and books in advance, but I really do want to make sure I like her still in book 2 and book 3.
Okay, that's great. Um, I, I keep wanting to call her Claire, but that's the name of the woman in Outlander. That's not her name, is it?
No.
What is your character's name? I'm
um
looking for it. Sorry, it's
she's
totally
currently
slipped my
called
mind.
she's currently called Elizabeth. one of
Elizabeth,
my
thank you.
one of my problems as an author is I'm not very good at names.
I'm
names
terrible.
aren't some, Names
Yeah,
aren't something that ever work for me, so I tend to just sort of give
yeah.
them generic names until towards the end, and I start to realize that's not her name or it is her name,
Oh,
and
that's
then I
it's
start
nice that you
thinking,
figure it out. I never figured it out. My characters are like Tim, Jim, Scott, Bill. Yeah, it's the
yeah.
worst.
What I
Um,
normally have is a document that'll get to 70,000 words, and XX is through the entire run. XX said to XX, and XX stood up looking at XX in alarm. It's like, oh, I've got to give these XX's names.
That's hysterical. That's actually one of the places like, I use Chat GPT for a lot of like brainstorming. I
Mm.
don't write with it because that's just not where I find enjoyment, but I use it for a lot of like, and man, I've been using it for names recently. Can you give me like 15 names?
Oh, do you know, it is so good. Up until ChatGPT, I used to go in and so bizarre. I would go in and find basketball teams from Slovenia, and
Oh, wow.
I'd go and pull their names out. Whichever country I was writing in, I
Yeah.
would go and find their teams, and then I'd go and take first names and surnames and just like they'll do. They're obviously real
Yeah.
enough.
That's hysterical. That's really smart. Um,
It's funny because I had one reader once email me and go, "Are you a fan of was Iranian squash teams?" It was like, oh my God, you never know when somebody is going to nail it. And it's like,
it's really
I
funny.
love Iranian squash as well. So, oh, okay.
That's hysterical. That's the best. Um, okay, so talk to me about we can kind of go two ways. We can talk through. I left you some notes. Again, the
Mm,
piece is really solid. I didn't have a ton of notes for you. Your structure, your so like there's a couple different when I look at a piece for the first time, there's a couple different things I look at. The first thing I look at is like what's is the structure of the dialogue empowering kind of the energy of the piece, meaning that
hmm
like you're allowing the characters to speak, you're not interrupting it with prose, and at the same time you're using like inner thoughts and reflections effectively. You super are, you've nailed it, right? Like the structure of the piece is great. So
Thank
I
you.
don't I don't really have anything to talk with you about that because it's you're really like you can see you've got a nice block of prose of exposition here in the opening, the and like I have notes, but I'm an editor. If you give an editor something, we're going to give you back notes. So there's a nice block of exposition up here at the top, and then we get once we're into the conversation, um you're letting them talk and you're using exposition in segment breaks and like natural pauses in the conversation. So it's great, lots of energy. You're really capitalizing on the detective uh genre, which is fantastic for dialogue because later when you get to a crime scene, you modulate both voices to be the like, okay, now we're in detective mode. And they talk through what they're seeing, which is perfect. It's why detective novels can be so great because they're always talking through what they're seeing. So it's a really good, yeah. So structure's great. Use of dialogue is really good. Um, so we could go through the notes. There's some notes I have about uh you lose some characters in a big cast scene. There's some things we can improve on, but they're small things. Um, or we could start breaking down character voices. What is going to be most helpful for you? What do you want to talk about first?
I think the most important thing to me is getting Elizabeth's voice right
Hmm,
and against Willoughby's voice. So it's character. I guess I
gotcha.
really need to get
Okay,
behind their motivations and who they are and how they would speak and really I really need to keep them as separate people and how I do that. Yeah,
gotcha.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. She has a very what are your inspirations for her?
Oh, what do you mean by inspiration?
Like, do you have a character in mind when you're writing her?
No, not yet.
Okay. She has in the second there is a switch in her voice.
Yeah, now you mentioned that, so I really wanted to look at that and see
Yeah.
where I'd gone wrong, or yeah, no, where I'd gone
Okay.
wrong.
So let's focus in specifically on her, and
hmm
then we can come back to him. Um, so before I jump into that, I do want to say because this one is an important note. You have this fantastic scene here. From what I could tell, there's five people in the room. There's Elizabeth, there's Mike,
Yep,
there's the sheriff, and then there's the woman sipping wine, and
yep,
there's the older man. These scenes where we have this big cast, right? Like anything over two people, I call a big cast scene.
yeah.
Um, they are like readers and story goers love them because there's so much energy in the back and forth between the cast members. And what
hmm
you have set up is um you have a main conversation going on between Elizabeth and Willoughby. I did get I did get his name right, right? Oh, did I mess up his name?
I think we start the conversation between her and the sheriff,
Her and the sheriff. Okay, yeah.
and the sheriff isn't her foil. It's going to be Willoughby.
Gotcha. So we start between her and the sheriff, and then she leaves with Willoughby.
Yeah,
Okay. We need to clean up the big cast conversation.
yeah,
You lose your characters in there. They
agreed.
disappear. So I I want you to find a way. A lot of times with these big cast conversations, the best thing to do is to find a pattern right to the pattern, and then when you come back and edit, break the pattern. So, have the sheriff speak, have her speak, have someone in the room comment. Sheriff speak, her speak, someone in the room comment. Sheriff speak, her speak, someone in the room comment. It's gonna feel like crappy writing. But what that's gonna do,
I'm quite familiar with that. We're
yeah,
fine.
what that's gonna do is it's gonna force you to get those characters that are hiding in the room to talk.
Yeah,
And
I was really aware that the one with the wine,
mhm,
she's still very 2D in my head.
yeah.
And and she's not talking yet. She's very superficial. She's very 2D.
And what's nice, because these are all like, does she come back? Is she a recurring character? Like, does Elizabeth go to this police station?
Everyone in this room is the foundation. Is
Perfect.
these people are going to be with Elizabeth. They're going to be her team, her
Okay.
backup throughout the
So,
book and throughout the series.
let's, what I want to do is talk about Elizabeth and then talk about that cast and how you can
Okay.
position those voices.
Yep.
Um, so real quick, let's get their names out. We've got Elizabeth as the main. We've got, is it Mike Willoughby?
No.
No, Mike is too different. Yeah.
Mike is somebody who just brought her to the thing and then slinks off.
Okay,
Well,
and
he
he
doesn't
doesn't
slink
come
off,
back.
but he just
Okay.
goes.
We've got the
He'll be
sheriff.
in the book, but it's
Yeah.
Sheriff. Oh, I've forgotten the sheriff's surname.
And you can
Name.
kind of
Oh,
feel me here as I'm talking about them, like losing where the characters are in the room. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Like, so we got
yeah,
to get real in this big cast scene, which your reader's gonna love because it's gonna give you a big contrast between the her and the foil at a crime scene, her and the foil walking, her and the foil having an intimate moment. These scenes are going to be like breaths of fresh air to the reader. They're going to be like, oh, this is the fun
yep,
scene.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. um I'm going to mention Outlander a couple more times because, and I have a reason for it with what I think you're going for with Elizabeth's voice and the kind of out of time nature of things. um but that series does this really, really well. She has the lead character has conversations with her romantic foil Jamie where they're together and alone, or she'll have conversations with that book's version of the sheriff, which is kind of he's kind of a rough, like he's the warlord of the Mackenzie clan. She'll have conversations with him where they're alone, but then you have these big conversations where it's her and all of the Scots. And what makes that book fun are those big conversations. Because and a lot of times she becomes an observer in those conversations. I don't know that you want that for Elizabeth, but that's how that writer um uh manipulates that big cast space. But in those big cast spaces, you're going to use a lot more dialogue tags than you're comfortable with. That's going to drive you crazy. And you're going to want to get rid of them all the time. And we've got to start grouping some of these people together as like, so you need a name for the old guy and the woman with the wine, right? Like
Yeah,
you need like Jimmy and Sarah. Like you just need like a phrase that you use every time you talk about them so that you can start grouping their actions together so they don't always have to talk. So like, the sheriff said blah blah blah. Jimmy and Sarah shook their head, right? Like it lets you get both of them in there. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So and then we've got her. Oh man, I'm gonna screw this up. Spell Willoughby for me.
Christ.
There
WILLOUGHB.
we go. Yeah, we're gonna do it that way. Thank you.
That's okay.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to do it in my head. I was like, this is a mess. Okay, so let's
We've
do
got
the two main characters, then we'll bring it. Oh, who are the other side characters? Since I've started
Alice
this
is in
nonsense.
there.
Alice. Okay.
Um, so Alice isn't it? Do you know what? There's only 4 people in the room.
There's not a fifth one? Isn't there an old guy?
Nope.
Oh. Well, what am I thinking of? Okay, I'm gonna push you out of fifth, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Um,
Okay.
yeah, because of the balance of personality. So talk to me about um who you want Elizabeth to be at the start of this story.
Okay. At the start of the story, we see her in London. She is a detective. How much backstory do we need? How much backstory do you want to know about her, or how much personality do you want? I don't want to bore
I
you with
want
the whole thing.
personality. So we move from like backstory builds personality, personality builds voice. So
Okay.
if you need to do the backstory, I can pull the voice out of the backstory, but if you can go the personality, it'll make it faster.
Okay. Personality, she is impulsive, spontaneous, lonely, isolated, angry,
Okay.
um, driven.
What's she angry about?
She's angry that her childhood was, she thinks her childhood was shit, which it was.
Okay.
Um, the city that where she grew up is Norwich, which is where she goes back to.
Okay.
But she ran away when she was 18 because she'd had enough of it, because it's a very dangerous place to grow up. So
Okay.
she ran away from it. She went to London, but people from Norwich aren't allowed to leave. So she's had to keep her identity secret when she went to London. So she's always lived hiding from her true nature. She can't tell anyone where she's come from.
Okay.
She's she's heavily scarred from the plague, so she looks physically not not pretty.
Gotcha.
She's not ugly, but she has severe scarring from the plague. She can't make friends easily because she can't tell them about her past. She finds them superficial for how easy a lifestyle they're having growing up in a normal city. She's never been able to quite relate to them. She's an utter fish out of water.
Okay. And the books all take like this book takes place completely in Norwich, or do we go back to London?
We start in London. We start right at the beginning. We see her as an impulsive detective who is on the fringe of friendships groups.
Okay.
She she's driven. All she cares about is her career because she's got nothing else, because she can't make friendship groups. And then she is sent to have to go to Norwich to go and catch an escaped convict.
Okay. Do you
So she's sent back.
in your other books do you do a lot of this like uh person wearing a mask type
No,
characters? Okay.
no, this is the
One
first time I've got somebody really having to go through a massive change.
okay. So in these there's a couple ways to go with these books, but in this kind of character arc, you have Elizabeth the Mask, and then you have um Elizabeth, true Elizabeth.
Okay, yep,
This is why I see now, like as we're talking, I see now why I was getting Outlander vibes because this it's the same. There's a she has her mask of who she's pretending to be, and then who she's hiding on the inside. And
right,
what we want to see as, and this is often a trust issue where there's the mask persona and then the real persona. And what
yeah,
happens a lot in these real personas is we want this to slip out
yeah,
on occasion, and we want her to get a little self-frustrated when it slips out because the growth arc you're going for in with every book, like if this becomes a series, you're not going to solve it in the first book, but it's the growth arc you're going for in every book, is that we want her to grow into this. We want her to
yeah,
be her true self.
yeah,
So when you're talking about impulsive, lonely, isolated, angry, and driven, the ones that stick out to me that are like the mask persona definitely is the isolated,
mm-hmm.
that's being forced by the mask, and lonely.
Yep.
Um, how is she hiding? Like, what does she have to do in London so that people don't know she's from Norwich?
Well, she can't talk about her past. She can't share anecdotes. She can't have a normal relationship with people because she's got no points of reference with them. She's
Okay.
got no, when you talk about what you did as a kid, her lifestyle, her
Yeah,
nothing
yeah.
like anyone
There's
else.
no background. Yeah. Um,
She's got no points of contact.
so she's very guarded and she's closed off.
Yep, yep.
That you've kind of got three aspects to her personality here. There's the isolated, lonely, and we're gonna add closed off and guarded to that. There's the professionalism you're kind of playing with and the driven. Um,
Yeah,
and then there's the impulsivity and the spontaneity.
that's
Um,
her.
yeah, that feels like that's what I was going to ask is like, is the spontaneity coming from her inner voice and who she is?
That's who she is.
Okay.
As a kid in Norwich, she had immense freedom in a way that kids don't normally have freedom. She
Yeah.
was, yeah, always running wild, having the time of her life, but also, a violent, dangerous city.
Yeah,
But she was happy without realizing she was happy, if that makes any sense yet.
it makes sense. Yeah.
I've just got to let the dog out.
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
There we go, back.
Okay. She feels like somebody who, in her true self, really likes people.
I would say she does.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But she doesn't come across that way at the
Yep.
beginning
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. So, the way I want you to arrange her voices, I'm going to recommend this professionalism needs to be her mask. So that's how she's hiding. That's how she's protecting herself is she is a professional driven detective. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that way people focus, that way she doesn't have to talk about who she was in the past. She's so driven and professional and focused that people take her for who she is.
Yeah.
Internally, she's spontaneous, happy, and really likes people. But on the
Mm-hmm.
outside, you know, this is the kind of woman where people are like, yeah, she's made of iron. She doesn't have any feelings. She's unemotional. But on the inside, she actually has a lot of feelings, and she's very impulsive and wants to be happy and likes people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it really does.
we get this kind of like, real kind of tortured self. The reason I want you to lead into that likes people and that's important for her internal voice is because if she's an introvert who doesn't like people, then the mask is actually very comfortable and she doesn't care to take it off. Does that make sense? She's like, this is great. I love that people leave me alone. But if she's somebody who has kind of extroverted tendencies that she's suppressing behind a guarded professional exterior, we'll get that feeling of like, oh, we really want her to be able to be her true self. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, this is absolutely brilliant. I love the way you're pulling this out.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad this is helpful. Sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is actually helpful or just causing you more problems. Um, so let's talk about her voice here. There's some places where I want you to watch her. Your Norwich sheriff, when we first meet her, when I first met her in this piece, your Norwich sheriff is mean, which is appropriate for his character.
Mm-hmm.
He's gruff. He's like, not talking to her, talking to the room, ignoring her. He's got the very much like, and we'll talk about your big cast in a minute and how they all operate with her, whether they encourage her to be the best version of herself or the worst version of herself. We definitely want Willoughby to be an engine to her that encourages her to be her true self. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, completely.
Yeah. So
That's who he is. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we want. We want him to like bring that true self out. So the tension in their relationship is about, can I be myself with this person?
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So in this, sorry, I'm looking for a couple lines that I saw when I was reading through. Um, yeah, so she's pretty professional in here. I'm just going to start highlighting her lines in a specific color. Um, so we can start popping her voice out a little bit as we talk. She's pretty professional in here. That's the sheriff. He took there we go. There she is. Um, this is her inner voice. I'm gonna mark her inner voice differently. Um, so here, this is what I was looking at. Well, that's her exterior voice because it's a body language thing. So exterior voice, and this is going to be super important for her. And part of what's going to make her a really dynamic and fun character is her inner voice is a different character than her exterior voice. That's going to create the tension for us. We need to really like her inner voice. Her inner voice needs to be um, playful, and her inner voice needs to notice the good things about people. Um, her exterior voice can show none of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, really does.
Yeah.
And I
So,
know,
oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was really struggling with this because I do have her in the previous chapters. Um, I try and keep her interior voice light, but her exterior voice snarky, and was wondering whether or not that was a big problem.
Snarky is going to be a problem because it's not. So,
Not
no,
not
and you're right. You have her snarky, and that's why I'm highlighting these lines. That's actually, it's perfect comics. It's what I want to talk about with you.
like,
Snarky draws attention to yourself. Does that make sense?
yeah.
And
And yet,
so
I mean, I know I've said I want her to hide, or I want her to. She doesn't. So does this work? When she's in London, she doesn't care enough about people anymore, that she doesn't care what they think, and she will just ride roughshod over them.
it does, but it can't be. And this is where I was struggling. It can't. I would it can be. Now there is no can or can't.
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
recommend it's not with snark, but it's with professionalism. Because being snarky, cracking jokes, being snarky can isolate you from people, but it's usually a way to divide a room. So cracking jokes, being snarky, saying kind of like mean things pushes the person you're talking to away, but it's always for an audience, right? Like snarky people tend to be snarky for the audience around them. And because snark in and of itself is a joke, right? Like you're making it at a minimum, you're trying to make yourself laugh, but you're also making other people laugh. So separating snark from mean, right? She can be mean and not snarky. Does that make sense? So in
Mhm.
this room, if she's being snarky, she's pushing back on the sheriff with kind of half an eye on the room around her to see how they're responding. That's what snark does. It like the snarky kid in a a high school classroom in a room full of teenagers is the kid that is making fun of the teacher and seems like he doesn't care what anybody thinks, but the snarky kid actually really cares what everybody thinks and is looking around the room for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I don't think she's doing that.
I would have her be on the exterior, cold, guarded, and professional. If this wasn't in first person and we didn't have her inner thoughts, we would really dislike her as a character.
Mm. Yep.
Because she's cold, there's not much to her
Yep.
on the outside. So, but we want her inner thoughts to be different. And you can have her inner thoughts be snarky if you want to keep the snark to entertain herself, but I'm actually going to recommend you go a different direction. Because when we get down with Willoughby, her voice modulates a little bit. And I want to talk about that too, but I'm going to stay in this big cast scene here for a minute because this is
Yep.
where we're really going to get to know her. So, um, this right here, I made a silly curtsy, and the chap in the pantaloons laughed, whilst the woman with the wine glass raised the toast to me. You see what I mean by snark? She's mocking the sheriff with an eye to everybody else around her. She's being the class clown here. And that is a different version of this character. That's not a bad version of this character, but that version of this character is not closed, guarded, and professional. That version of this character is the life of the party.
Yeah, that sentence doesn't work for her.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for her now. It's going to work for her at the end of the book in future books. That's who she's going to become.
Yeah, that's her inner voice. That's the
Yeah.
spontaneous, impulsive. I like people. I like being the center of attention.
Yeah. I'm a
Yeah,
leader.
I'm a
That,
leader. Yeah. And
yeah.
I lead because I like people and they like me. Right? Like, but
Yep.
that's not who she is now. And we can't get there this early. And
Yeah.
I would say like that's probably a mid book 2 line. I don't even
Yep.
think she leads this room. In this book, you want them discovering her inner self and trying to coax it out of her. You want them trying to you want her anchors um constantly invalidating her, and you want her engines. So the anchors are the people that push her to be the worst version of herself. The engines are the people that encourage her to be the best version of herself. It's why I'm going to push you to in a second to talk about this cast and who the cast are. Um, the engines need to secretly see who she is on the inside. And so they need to kind of tease with her in this way, but she can't respond until toward the end of the book when trust has been built between them. Does that make sense?
Oh, it so does. This is definitely a me problem. This is me trying to race towards my character's goal. I want to get to her, and I'm doing it way too soon.
Yeah, and the beauty of the book is that we want it, so when it finally comes out, it'll be really great. This is a perfect response. It's about the facts for her exterior voice. They were out of horses at the border and he was too scared to walk. It's about the facts. It gives no commentary on what's going on, right? She's not like, and the wimp was too, and that wimpy Londoner was too scared to walk. No commentary on what's going on. And it is, she's not actually responding to how the sheriff is behaving. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
if you want to go with this voice, that's that isolated, guarded, professional voice. Is that like, I'm sticking to just the facts. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on. I'm going to have and we'll talk about her internal voice in a minute. But this is another one. Maybe they were concerned confidential documents would get lost in the crossing. I said stiffly. Making excuses in a professional way that doesn't disparage anyone and draws no attention to herself. Does that make sense? Like that's a
Yep.
great line. Uh maybe they Now this one gets a little too snarky. Maybe they'd
Yeah, but I think she's lost her temper at this point. She's losing her temper with him calling her a little lady.
Yeah, but she can't. She can lose it internally. She can't ever lose it externally. That's what you're holding on to. She can't lose her temper externally, because what you want to set up is that when she does lose her temper externally, the whole room goes, oh, right? So she's got to be protected all the way through. Until she starts building trust with Willoughby or someone else in the room. Does that make sense?
Yep. But in that case, without her biting, how do I set up the rest of with everyone turning around to the sheriff and saying, well, she's got you there, back off?
You give her a fact. You give her a professional declaration that he can't argue with. Right. So, instead of, he's like, they trust a little lady with yourself, a little lady like yourself, not to die or lose the papers. She needs to lean on her professionalism. Right. Maybe, sir, what you should assume is that I've earned this trust. Right. Like, where he's being a monster, she's going to be professional and guarded. And the room can joke and have a good time. And then so does that make sense before we get to her inner thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah. You keep her externally locked down. Going back to that Outlander series, because you do have this like outsider out of time hiding who she really is, although she does it very differently. So I don't want you to think you're writing that character. You're not, but there is a good comparison there. She's there's a scene in book one where she tells a joke for the first time. They're constantly making like body sexual jokes. And there's a scene where she tells a joke the first time, and all of the men she's with like don't know what to do. They stand in silence looking at her until finally one of the side characters laughs, and then everybody laughs. And it's this big moment of acceptance, right? Like, that's the moment you want to drive us to as a reader, where
Right.
when she finally gives it back to this sheriff, we're all like, the room is like, yeah, right? Like, and it's this moment of like embracing her, but you can't give it to us until 2/3 of the way through the book. Yeah. Um, okay. So that's her exterior voice. So when we're talking about her exterior voice, we want her to be professional. Like, she's gonna stick. So I break voice down into 5 things. There's the topics she's going to talk about. There's the vocabulary she's going to use. There's the body language she's going to have, because that's part of her character voice. There's the construction of her utterances, like the when she speaks, what's the grammatical construction of that speech? And then there's how does she participate in group conversations, which her pacing, like when does she get involved and when does she not get involved. So her topics need to be professional and about the job. Exterior voice, what everybody sees, right? um and she's always serious, right? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Actually, we will do that, because I love this program because it gives me a whiteboard we can work with, but it's also kind of a pain in the butt. Vocab um, is not necessarily important for her, but I would say like it also needs to use professional language. So you want her, especially with this sheriff, she needs to be the only one in the room calling him sir. Does that make sense? Because he's a ranking officer.
Yep.
So she needs to respect things like rank when other people don't. And we'll get to these other characters around her. They're going to comment on her language. Does that make sense? So we're
Yeah.
going to draw attention to the fact that she's the only person doing this by having the other characters in the room point it out. Right. So they'll be the ones that are like, oh, um, this is where the woman with the wine can be like, sir, nobody's called him sir in a decade, right? Like, it's that kind of
Yeah.
pushing. Yeah. Body language is tight, and you want her not wanting to be touched externally, right?
Yep.
Internally, she really wants to be touched. Externally, she doesn't want to be touched. Um, so, and then cadence, that like construction of utterances, one sentence ends in a period.
Yeah. She's not verbose.
Not verbose, and she is keeping conversation focused and where it needs to be. Does that make sense?
I was finding, sorry, because she doesn't start really interacting with people for, I think this meeting is maybe 4 or 5 chapters in.
Okay.
I've given her a dog.
Yeah, the dog's great.
She has a dog, so she's got somebody to talk to and somebody to care for.
Yeah.
That
And
she doesn't think she's somebody who cares about people,
the
and
dog's
she doesn't.
Henry
Um,
or my
Harry,
Harry. Thank you.
Harry, the dog is Harry,
Yeah.
and Harry is there as a foil, so that she's got somebody to care about, even when she thinks she doesn't want the dog, and that the dog's going to be a nuisance, and the last thing she wants is a bloody dog. It gives her something to look after and care for and worry about, to give her some, because she's so cold. I really wanted people to
Yeah.
spot quite quickly she isn't as cold as she comes across.
It is brilliant. It is a brilliant trick. And what you're doing to put it in context of what we're going to talk about is you are giving her true voice somebody to speak to so that we see her true voice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a really brilliant trick. It's really smart to be like, okay, with the dog, she's who she's going to be by the end of the novel and the inner voice that we hear. So we want her interior thoughts to be
With
different.
that,
Yeah.
am I spoiling things? If there's a scene, maybe 2 scenes before this, where up until that point she thinks the dog is an annoyance and an irritation, and she's also a little bit scared of the dog.
That's an earlier book.
But there's a bit where they get attacked by wolves and she has to save the dog. And there's a part of her that thinks, if I throw the dog to the wolves, I can escape. And then there's a point where she goes, shit, I'm going to actually have to save the dog now, aren't I? And she saves the dog. And then she arrives into Norwich. So am I spoiling things by showing already that she does care and she will put others before herself?
No, but I would do it differently. So she is going to have her own real voice. So I have 2 hesitations. One is how you're getting to her real voice. Her saving other people is her professionalist voice. It's not saving other people that brings her to her true self. It's being saved. Knowing that she can trust somebody and she can be vulnerable with somebody allows her to speak who she is. When she feels safe, she can be her true self. Does that make sense? So you have her saving the dog. That's just her. That's just what she does. Of course she'd save the dog. She's a detective. She's the, best goddamn detective on the force. People, a sheriff who is disciplined, rigorous, and has his crap together loves her exterior voice. She's the detective that he wants. She gets the job done. She doesn't give him any flack. She's not screwing around like everybody else. She comes in, she goes to work, she goes home. You're the perfect detective. None of this like nonsensical drama that these other idiots bring into the room, right? Like a rigorous boss is going to think she's the best. So saving a dog, yeah, that's what she does. Like taking on a group of wolves, yeah, that's who she is. But being saved to where she can be trusting of somebody, feeling safe in dangerous situations allows her to open up to who she is.
I love that. The idea of her becoming vulnerable enough to allow herself to be saved. God, I can't think how much she's going to hate that.
She's going to hate it. And but you can see like with the dog, how that makes a switch where she's like, oh, All right, you're not so bad as it is. My hesitation around it is that it's coming. The reason I said like that's a previous book, that's a prequel. With everybody, you're going to have this intermediate period where she is both herself and not herself, right? You're going to have this period of testing out safety. Like I was sharing that moment in Outlander where the character makes a joke and kind of like gives it back to all the men. She's testing out her true voice. Am I safe here? So because it's a dog, you get kind of a little bit of a grace period, but being herself needs to feel uncomfortable, so she needs to test it out a little bit
Mhm.
before she does it. So you almost want a scene where she's kind of testing it out with the dog, where she's talking with the dog about who she is and kind of decides like this is nice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll have to add a scene. She can't just feel safe and then go right into like being her true self with the dog. She's got to test it a little bit. And so you'll need a scene where she's like at a campfire, just her and the dog, and she's like this is the classic dog scene. She's at a campfire, her and the dog. She's personifying the dog, like speaking for the dog, right? As they're eating together. It's the classic like master dog scene where she's
Yeah.
like, "What, you don't like
In,
it?"
no, in 2 scenes time, I have it.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah. So you want that like you don't like it? The dog like he looked back at her as blah blah blah. The dog's voice is all body language, so it's like he looked back at her as blah 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 blah. So it was all we've got. He winded her. She says, "Well, I have this, but this is mine." You know, he winded her again. Fine, and then she shares it with him, and then he's really happy, and then she pets him, and she's like, "Oh, this isn't too bad." Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, I've 2 chapters down the road,
Perfect.
that scene
Yeah,
happens.
that's what you gotta have. So
Great.
then, and
You.
what you're doing for the reader is you are kind of foreshadowing, like she can have real relationships. You almost want to in that scene with her petting the dog and like saying out loud, like, "This is nice. This is nice." Like it's that kind of like she's gonna need to acknowledge openly that like I don't get to do this much. Like this is a nice and like you almost want her telling the dog that first time she's vulnerable with the dog to be like, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's talk about
That's
her in
nice.
yeah, let's talk about her internal language because you need her internal voice to be very different. So the topics her internal voice talks about. Um, you want her noticing good things about people, right? Her internal
Mhm.
voice can't be mean or snarky. You want
Yeah.
it needs to be positive and people loving because you really want to create that separation between her professionalism and her internal voice. So she needs to notice, like, and it's going to help you in these big cast scenes, especially the first one. She's going to walk in the room and clock everybody there. She's going to
I,
see everybody.
that's fine. But what I want ultimately is that she is going to be a more, while she does like people and all of that, she is a more sarcastic, observational person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's
Because,
great because again, sarcasm and joking unites a room,
yeah,
especially in a place of safety.
Willoughby is going to be the one that always sees, is going to be the more positive,
Hmm.
kinder person, the one that is prepared to give people more of a break. She's always going to be more suspicious than
Yeah,
Willoughby.
and he's got to be because he needs to be doing what she wants to do. So he also needs to share this noticing positive things about people. This doesn't mean she can't be sarcastic in her future exterior voice because you're going to merge the professionalism, the mature version of her character that is in a book 2 or book 3. You don't get to write it in this book. The mature version of her character can be that like professional hard nose that loves people, that kind of gives shit back to people when they give shit back to her, right?
That's what I
Willoughby
need
is
from
just
her.
going to be kind, and we may want to make him a little shy, but we'll get to your cast in a minute. Because with
Mhm.
an engine, with a character that like brings out the best in your lead character, you want that engine to both um contrast and complement, and you want them to complement the best aspects of her. So he's going to sound like a version of her inner voice, encouraging her towards safety and vulnerability. Excuse me. Does that make
Bless
sense?
you. Yep.
So vocab, her inner voice, and this is what you're talking about. Her inner voice is relaxed in its vocabulary. It doesn't need that professional exterior. Inner voice, you don't get any body language, which is fine because it would be weird if your inner brain had body language. I mean, maybe somebody can pull it off. Cadence, you want her inner voice talking a lot, right? Like you want her inner voice, two sentences, asking questions, right? She's observational. It's part of what makes her a good detective, is she's seeing things, but she's keeping it all in here. She's not necessarily sharing it. Um, and then pacing, you're going to treat her inner voice like it's its own character in the story. So her inner voice is going to need to keep up in a big cast conversation. You're not going to be able to hold it for the segment breaks. You want her actively thinking about what's going on, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So often in a first person POV, what we'll have is a character who everybody talks, right? She talks, sheriff talks, she talks, Alice comments, sheriff talks, she talks, Willoughby comments, sheriff talks, Willoughby comments, she talks. End of that topic of conversation, like they're talking about why she hasn't come under the appropriate channels. End of that topic of conversation. Then she has a reflective thought. That's a normal POV. You want to treat her like her inner voice is present in the room next to her exterior voice. So she's going to have a lot more inner thoughts. So just looking at this, is this what passes for a police report in London? He asks, waving the pages around. Someone comments, third party, right? Says something. Inner thought. Her comment. See everyone, right? No, so someone comments, this is what passes for a report in London, he asks, waving the report aggressively around. Haha, London. Somebody says. Inner thought. If anything else, he had definitely earned the trust of his people. Positive thought about a sheriff who's being mean for her. Her comment. Uh, you know, Sir London, at London, we have our own ways to do things, and it seems to be pretty effective. Right? See ya, he ignores her. See everyone, no statements, no profiles, just some pretty horrific photos of two sweet young victims and a mug shot. Someone comments, right? Someone in the room comments. Great inner thought. This is dreadful. How was North supposed to help capture if they didn't have all the facts? Right? Make a comment on him. As much as I wish he wasn't giving me this crap, he's
Susan's right.
actually spot on.
Yeah.
Right? Hell, how was I supposed to do this? Great exterior thought. Maybe they were concerned the confidential documents would get lost in the crossing. I said stiffly. Right? Can you see how I'm using her inner thought as the character we want her to be? Her exterior voice is who she doesn't want to be. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is why you got to start getting this cast involved. Can you see how the cast participating with the sheriff actually takes the pressure off of her as the lead character to talk too much.
Yeah.
Right? If we can start getting the cast involved, it takes the pressure off of you to use her unlikable voice too much. She doesn't have to talk unless she has to talk. Does that make
It
sense?
also gives the reader some room to breathe
Hmm.
into what is going to be a foundation scene for going forwards. They're going to need to know this room, these
Oh,
characters.
and they're gonna love this room. They're gonna want the whole book to happen in this room. Right? Like this
I
is the
really
place where they
need,
really relish. Yeah.
yeah, I really want my readers to feel instantly, well, not instantly, but they need to get this is the foundation scene for the
Hmm.
readers,
Yeah.
and this will give them some space to do it in.
Part of what situational comedies on television learned in the 90s is that this room is all that matters. That's why like shows like Seinfeld and Friends and The Office and Parks and Rec, they center around a single room with a quirky group of characters. We don't need to see their lives outside of this room in a comedy, not in a detective novel. You do need to get her out of this room. She's got to go
Yeah,
because we're in it for the thrill. But I'm saying that to say, like, that's the importance of this room is that you could actually build a whole story and never leave this room, just watching the interaction between the characters. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And that's why I love what you've done here by breaking this down. It's just giving it a bit more breathing space
yeah, and
without, without it being really heavy exposition. That was the bit
yeah,
I don't want to bore people here, but they've really got to get to this.
yeah. Part of what you also want her doing in this inner voice is commenting on her exterior voice.
Oh, yeah.
So when and you don't want to do it all the time. You just want to do it in moments of you're gonna have moments in conversation, especially with Willoughby, where she has the option to be vulnerable and she chooses instead to be professional. And you want her inner voice commenting on that, on how much she hates that she's doing that.
That suggests a big level of self-awareness, though, doesn't it? I
She's
don't know
wearing she's wearing
how
a mask.
self-aware she is.
She's got to
Yeah,
be
but I don't.
highly self-aware. She's wearing a mask. She wants to be her true self, but for most of her life, she's had this mask on. And he's going to offer her moments where she can be her true self, and she needs to lean on the mask. And then she needs to hate the response that it brings from him. You're going to preface to build when you have a really dramatic moment like that. Like you actually give me one that's a little it's not too early. Um you want him, so let's say in a moment of like something happens, he defends her and makes her feel safe, much to her surprise. And she's flustered and a little angry. So she's like her mask is in danger of slipping. They walk away and he's like tending to her wound. This is another trope scene, right? Like she's like cut her hand or something. And he's like, let me see it to help you bandage it. And she's like pulling away. No, don't touch me. And then she's gonna have an inner thought, right? The warmth of his hand on my aching pain uh soothed my calm. Um but something in me wasn't prepared, like but I'm just not sure if this is I can trust him. I don't like those words, but something of that nature. And then have him be like, hey, it's okay, you're hurt, let me help. And have her internal voice go, looking up into his eyes, there's nothing more I wanted at that moment than for him to help. I yanked my hand back. I've got it, I said. you know he pulled back from me like a wounded puppy. And why did I have to do this all the time? Why do I have to constantly push people away? That's the commenting I want on her voice in these moments of vulnerability, is the like, why do I have to keep doing this? Why can't I trust him? It's this middle ground where sometimes she's going to test out and try things and going to feel safe, especially in a big group conversation where you have the safety of repeated people. Sometimes she's going to refuse and regret. She's going to refuse vulnerability. She's going to reject vulnerability. She's going to be professional when she has the option to be safe, and she's going to regret it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This middle ground is where she needs to live with Willoughby, because that gives us the, like, when they become a couple, he'll become like the dog. I hate to say that, but that's what we're going for. So it's that, thing. So, you feel like you've got a handle on her before we talk about your cast?
Yeah, much clearer.
Okay. Sorry, I'm making sure I'm not holding you too long. I've had you on for an hour, so I am gonna run through some of this, but I'm just gonna give you some ideas real quick. Is that okay?
Yeah, God, yeah.
Talk to me about, give me 4 adjectives for Willoughby.
Confident, self-assured, a leader. No, not a leader. He's nice. He cares about people. He is in charge. He is used to being a leader, and he's not driven. He's not lazy. He's not driven. He's just used to being the person that people turn to. He's kind, but he's a
Okay.
nice person. He's not a dick. He can be, he's not arrogant, but he is used to being the most important person in the room.
I'm gonna push on that.
And he's good looking, and he has a lot of female attention.
Why isn't
Yeah,
he in a relationship?
yeah, that's a nice question.
Okay. He needs to be shy. He needs to be an introvert. And he's also wearing a mask, by the way. But we're not going to get into his mask
How
because
does being shy and introvert work with being confident and self-assured?
because he's good looking and he's caring of other people. So he comes off as confident and self-assured. But internally, he's actually shy and introverted. Everyone thinks this is the guy that wants to run into the burning building and walk away with 10 women. This is actually the guy that wants to sit by the fire and read a book.
Yeah,
That's how you want him. That's why he's going to be drawn to her. So they have to contrast in some ways. And if you have him
yeah,
as if you have him as this confident, self-assured, perfect detective who's kicking ass all the time, they're too similar. They're going to fight with
yeah,
each other. Right? He can be self-assured. I might take away the word confident because it carries some bravado with it. He can be
yeah,
self-assured and like secure in who he is, right? Like he knows who he is. He knows what he does well. He's very caring. He's very compassionate, shockingly so. He, even though he is a good looking, charming guy, he's the one that comes in. And when he comes into the room, we need to see him greet Alice with the wine. We need to see him say hello to, not in a way that draws attention to himself, but he needs to quietly go over. He needs to touch her hand. He needs to be like, "Hey, how are you this morning?" He then needs to go to the other guy in the room and like say something to him that's very kind, and then he can take his place in the room. But he is a people focused person who he's not, you can't have him be a leader because of his professionalism and skill. That's too much like her.
yeah,
He's a leader because he's the guy you can depend on. But he's super dependable and he's crazy loyal.
yeah. That's that feels more comfortable because she is the one that will run into a burning building.
Oh yeah.
He will assess whether or not there's a better way to do it.
And he'll run into the burning building if there's a kid on the top floor who's in
Oh
danger.
yeah, yeah, of course
Yeah,
he will.
if
But
he
he
has
will
to.
have all. Yeah, he will have always thought about plans, and he'll have thought about contingencies, and she won't.
Yeah. So here's a dirty trick you'll never let the reader know. He and the dog are the same person. He's the dog. Does that make sense?
Oh, I love
They have the
that.
same personality. He and the dog have the same personality. And
Oh, I love that.
these are your engines, right? These are the people that encourage her to be the best version of herself.
That's so good. Yep, of course it
Okay.
is. Yeah.
So I'm just going to run through your side characters because you're missing some cast members
Oh,
that
okay.
you've got to add. Um,
Yep.
and we're just going to do these with like a couple personality traits. These three characters, Willoughby, Dog, and Elizabeth, these are the three characters that you really have to have complex emotional range for. Not
Mhm.
even the dog, but Willoughby and Elizabeth, you have to have complex emotional range for.
Yeah.
These other side characters, they can be more stereotypes or archetypes. They don't have to be as emotionally depth, like they can be more one note. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you want your sheriff to be the grandstanding asshole,
Yep.
but who has a history with these people.
Yeah.
They've learned to forgive his grandstanding assholeriness in a way that they want her to learn.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It does.
He's an anchor in that his grandstanding assholeriness encourages this behavior. Does that make sense? When he's an asshole, she's a hard nose.
Yep. And she will always respond to him being an asshole by going more into the
More into the hard
professional
nose. Yeah,
response.
more into
Yeah.
being professional. He encourages the Elizabeth we don't want to see. That's why he's an anchor. Being an anchor doesn't mean he's a villain. He's not a villain. He's an ally to her. He is her coworker, but he encourages the worst version of herself. You need some. Alice is the wine drinking woman.
Yep.
Okay. How do you have her right now? What's her? Do you have a voice for her? You said you were struggling with her.
No, I'm sorry, Alice, but she is very much she doesn't really have much of a role except for admin at the
Yeah.
moment.
So she doesn't
I
need a
haven't got
role in the
the
story. She needs a role emotionally in the character growth to be
okay.
something that she's doing. So I would have her hapless, and a little ditzy. We need the like one of the characters you're missing here is the um lovable chaos agent in the conversation. So you need the person that's like that the sheriff is going to bite at a little bit and is going to be frustrated with all the time. God damn it, Alice. Right? Like you need that kind of that's where we're going to see Willoughby's compassion because he's going to even though Alice drives everybody crazy, he's going to love Alice. So we're going to get his compassion there. Um and that's where we're going to see Elizabeth notice Willoughby. Right? So you need her to be the word chaos is a complicated word, so I'm actually going to take that out, but it's the lovable problem in the office, right? Um you need somebody you're missing is the sheriff's sidekick. He only gets to behave that way if there's a character that's his yes man. These characters always have a sidekick. They always have a like, yeah, boss, like get them. Like they always have that kind of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. In the office, Michael Scott only works because Dwight is running around being his, you know,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
You need the Dwight. This character is gonna be a little weird, right?
Hmm.
And that's what makes them lovable is because they're weird. Because they're weird, we're like, oh, they're quirky. I'm here for this. And the sheriff needs to dislike them, right? If you're You when I said The Office, you seem to you watched that?
I know the UK version.
Okay. I don't know the UK version as well. I know the US version better, but this is your Jim,
Yeah,
this is your
yeah.
Pam, right? They don't do this as much in the US version. They actually do this with Pam a little bit, not as much, but she does have like the professional to true self. This is your Michael, and this is your Dwight, right? You have to have the weird Dwight. You have to have the grandstanding sheriff. Now, your grandstanding sheriff, Michael Scott, the Ricky Gervais character, really thinks everybody loves him. This sheriff doesn't care, right? Like, so it's not, he's not going to
Yeah.
be a Michael Scott, but the sheriff doesn't care that everybody, you know, loves him, unlike the Michael Scott version, who's like, I'm the best boss in the world. So it's that, but you got to have this sidekick that's missing right now. You have to have Alice as that. This is what I call a hazard character because she causes situations that everybody in the room needs to respond to. You probably need one more hazard character, another police officer, um, who's like, I'm just doing my job.
That's probably going to be Mike who brought her to the.
Perfect.
Mike turns up a bit, so that would be Mike.
Yeah, you want him in the room all the time.
Okay.
He's more an observer. He doesn't mind commenting on the sheriff's nonsense. And even though he's apathetic and probably a little sarcastic, um he doesn't talk much. You want to give him a desk where he can just sit over on the side, and every once in a while he's your peanut gallery, right? In the Muppets, you have to have Statler and Waldorf commenting on the idiocy of what's happening.
Are they the
And
guys in the box?
they're the old guys in the box.
Yeah, okay.
In the Office, you have, in the American version, it's a guy named Stanley who's kind of a heavy set black man who is just trying to show up and do his job. And every once in a while, his voice is kind of like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. That's kind of what you want in this voice. The like, you know, I guess we're gonna go do this thing again. Like that's kind of who you're looking for here. If you talk about the Winnie the Pooh cast, right? You have the Winnie the Pooh is actually usually the Willoughby character, the kind like everybody likes being around him. You don't necessarily have, usually Rue fills this Elizabeth side because Rue is the one that's like changing and growing. This is the Rabbit character. Rabbit always has Owl with him. They're usually on the same side of things. Rabbit takes things too far and is a little mean to everybody. Owl plays the sidekick role in that he's weird and that he's so intellectual that he's like weirdly out of sync with everybody around him. And then this is your Eeyore, who's like, I guess we're gonna go down that path again. He doesn't ever really want to do anything. He's just there. And then this is the
Is this
Piglet
Tigger?
character. Yeah, or
Oh, Tigger.
Tigger. Tigger also works here, right? Like Tigger also plays this role. Piglet plays this role. Piglet is the like worried, scared, like chaos agent that a rabbit is always mad at. Or you have Tigger plays this role too, as the like crazy chaos agent who's like bouncing around in fun, which is another character you can put here. But I would probably not, if you want the room to be more fun and exciting, you put a Tigger. If you want the room to be more um kind of on point, it all depends on the tone of the book. If the book is supposed to be fun, Tigger. If the book is supposed to be more serious, Sherlock Holmesy, you want a more like hapless, ditzy character in that room. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. My problem with putting a Tigger character in is that I would probably fall in love with my Tigger character.
Yeah, and they're gonna bring a
And I
lot of
would, and
energy.
they'll take all the oxygen out of any scene.
Yeah, for what I would have, I would write a Tigger character here, but usually in this kind of situation, the Tigger character is more like an artful dodger. It's like a homeless kid that's running around that's always helpful. Does that make sense? Like that's where your Tigger character shows up. You don't
Yeah.
want them in this room because that brings too much energy to this room.
Yeah.
But you do, and they end up playing kind of the role of like Willoughby or the dog. What's nice, a nice trick you can do with those Tigger characters is because at some point you'll need a character that she's mistakenly vulnerable with because they're going to take advantage of her.
Right.
That's
Yes.
usually a book two,
Yeah.
right? Where she's, that's typically a book two because you're going to start to make this change for book two. You're going to have to pull her back in this way.
I was going to say, making her mistakenly vulnerable will smack her back. And I think in book
Smacks her right
one, I
back.
wanted to get to that point,
hmm
and then we'll drag her back.
Yeah, usually in book two, there's two things that are going to happen. She's going to learn something about Willoughby that's going to make her feel betrayed, and she's going to have a character that she's been mistakenly vulnerable with that's going to push her back this way,
Yeah.
and then she has to overcome her trust. Now, there's a lot. One, how do you feel about this? Are you starting to feel this cast flush out a little bit?
There's one character missing that is a major character in this book
Okay.
that isn't in the scene. It's not I suppose you would call it a mentor. It's somebody that she absolutely venerates and looks up to.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
she is thrilled that this woman is in her life. We won't meet her for a bit. She's going to be amazed when she does meet her. She's been somebody that she's idolized since a child. So she's
Is
absolutely it.
she's in Norwich?
She's in Norwich, yeah.
Okay.
She would,
That can.
Elizabeth would only ever want her to view her in the best of lights.
Mhm.
She is trying to be everything to her. And if she screws up or she's embarrassed in front of her, that would be the worst thing for her.
Um, so you may hate this. That character's an anchor. That character is Elizabeth has to idolize her and love her because she is the most professional of the professional detectives. Because Elizabeth has been striving her whole life to keep this mask up. And this woman is the personification of who Elizabeth thinks she wants to be. So in story
Okay,
hypothesis language, what you do with her as the book goes on can be different, but when we meet her, she needs to encourage Elizabeth to be the most professional of the professional.
might need to put someone else in because this woman's role is something quite different.
What's her role?
She's the woman that represents safety to Elizabeth.
Okay, so she's not a detective.
No, she's a bishop.
Oh, okay, then she's a confidant. Yeah, then you
And
move her over
she's
here.
almost a saint. In terms
Yeah.
of Norwich history, she is a saint. She represents safety, stability,
Uh,
everything that Elizabeth was denied as a child. She views this person as being capable of offering her
hmm.
everything safe, everything warm, everything trustworthy.
Gotcha. So Elizabeth doesn't, I'm gonna just push back on some of the language you're using. Elizabeth doesn't want to be this woman.
No, no,
Elizabeth admires this woman.
maybe this woman represents a mother or just utter safety.
Gotcha.
This woman is the most safe
Yeah.
personification of trust, love, warmth,
It's the
stability.
safe place to go when Elizabeth is really challenged by the murder. She's going to go confess to this woman.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that woman is the lodestone.
You only want this woman interacting with Elizabeth. She cannot interact with the rest of this cast because what you're going to set up with this woman is um uh she is Elizabeth's reflective time. Does that make
Mhm,
sense? When Elizabeth wanders into her church, she's alone and it becomes a confessional
mhm.
where Elizabeth can be herself. The spontaneity, but she's only going to come to this woman. She's not going to come to this woman to have a good time.
No,
She becomes this woman when she's in trouble. She's herself in that she is all these things, but it's a modulated voice because she's
Yeah.
really troubled. So like the happiness is going to be gone. Does that make
And
sense?
yeah, she's in awe of this woman. There is no way she'd be
Yeah.
relaxed
Yeah.
or
So
gentle
that's
with her.
that character works. You can't use them very often. You get an introduction scene where Elizabeth kind of oohs and ahs over her in front of Willoughby. Willoughby thinks it's pretty cute that happens. Then in a moment of failure, Elizabeth is going to wander into that woman's church by herself and they'll have their first real conversation. And the woman will be more reflective and saintly. It's different. I was talking about with Willoughby where he is representing the kind of caring, compassionate side of Elizabeth that we're going to bring out. Um, sorry, my 8-year-old just appeared over there. The caring, kind side of Elizabeth that he's gonna bring out. You want this mentor figure to represent a different type of Elizabeth's personality, which is true self. This woman is who she is all the time. She is not, there is no mask. And so there's the
Mm.
freedom of vulnerability that attracts Elizabeth to her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Because we
very
got to
much.
contrast her from Willoughby. You can't have her mimic Willoughby's compassionate caring. Um, you want this woman to play the role of a therapist.
Yeah.
That's who she is. She's playing for a character that never goes to a therapist. She's playing Elizabeth therapist. You get this a lot in superhero action novels. There's often a priest that they go to, that they talk to. Now, if you really want to drive Elizabeth to the darkest version of herself in book 3, you kill this woman. And
Oh my God, I
then we
cannot
get
kill her.
Elizabeth book that's what the reader will think too. In book 3 you kill her and then we get the like ram because we are going to it is the moment in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf moves out onto the bridge and says none shall pass and then falls to his death and everybody is lost.
Oh, oh, I can kill her. I thought you said Elizabeth kills
No, no,
her.
no, no, no,
The
you
author.
as the author. Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, that's fine.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I can. I was going to say,
Yeah.
there's no way.
The other character we haven't talked about who's here is the arch villain.
Hmm.
Um in this kind with this kind of character with Elizabeth, who is the like serial murderer that keeps coming back, or sometimes they're the mastermind criminal. This is your Moriarty.
Yeah,
Um for a detective novel, the Moriarty, like this isn't for a superhero novel, the arch villain pushes the character to the best version of themselves. For a detective novel, the supervillain pushes the character to the worst version of themselves. There, Moriarty makes Sherlock the worst version of himself. To defeat Sherlock, to defeat Moriarty, Sherlock feels like he needs to be alone. He needs to be isolated. He needs to be 100% focused on the case. When he gets involved in like Watson's personal life, when he gets involved in caring for people, he becomes vulnerable and Moriarty can hurt him. And so he has to be the prototype professional with no attachments in order to defeat this arch villain. That's what the detective character always thinks. The truth is, the detective character needs to lean on their community to defeat the arch villain. They need to involve all of these people to defeat the arch villain. But like Sherlock actually needs Watson to beat Moriarty, but Sherlock believes he doesn't. So in J.P. Rindfleisch's book Story Hypothesis, he talks about there's the character's false need, the character's developing need, and the character's true need. And what happens in a detective novel, especially, is the character's false need is they believe they need to be the worst version of themselves. She believes in order to defeat the archvillain, to catch the criminal, she has to be isolated, lonely, guarded, and closed off. For an arch villain, it's because if I'm not 100% focused on him, I will never catch him. He's too good. I have to be that good. That's their false need. As they have their false need, their developing need in Elizabeth's case is building a community of safety and vulnerability where she can be herself with these people in different ways, because her true need is to be her full self. And the way she's going to catch the archvillain is to be her true self. And in book 3, the reason you kill this woman is because the archvillain recognizes what's happening. So in order to drive Elizabeth to the worst version of herself, the archvillain takes somebody who represents the best version of herself and makes all of her fears come true.
Love it.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
So the archvillain, is it okay to have them very quietly in the background in book 1?
Book 1 and book 2, book 1 and totally in the background.
Yeah, I
Right.
just want to reference them. I have referenced somebody very quietly at the beginning of the book who sort of pretty much kicks this all off. She can't stand, she really has an issue with them, but it's not their story in this book. The story in this book is her going to Norwich, her settling into Norwich and capturing a killer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you want that killer somehow connected to this archvillain.
Yep.
And you want the archvillain to be kind of a myth that's whispered about in book 1, but not revealed. You might reveal them in the last scene as a move to the next. This type of archvillain is always an extreme.
Yeah.
So they're either extremely disciplined, or they're extreme chaos, or they're extreme mob gangstery. Like they're always an extreme.
Yeah.
Moriarty is the extreme disciplined rigor brilliance, right? In the Spider-Man, you have Kingpin. Kingpin is the extreme gangster. He's the most gangster of all the gangsters, right? Like so that's who you want this archvillain to be. You really don't want her confronting him until book 3. Yeah.
That feels right.
After she defeats the archvillain, the series is usually over because there's nowhere else to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording and we can chat a little bit more.